So this is a statement that can be hard to understand. This summer I'm going to be doing a series of statements, a series of sermons on life-giving statements by Jesus, things that Jesus said that changed people's lives or turned lives around. I presented some of these, a list of these that I came across to the deacons, and they picked out a few, and this is the first one, and it's a tough one. It's a tough one because it's a paradox. In my weakness, I am strong. When I am weak, I am strong. And it's one of the things that comes from Paul's letter to the church in Corinth. You know what a paradox is, right? A paradox is a statement that contradicts itself. The other day I was teasing some kids in the neighborhood, and I had made up some fantastic story to tell them, and then afterwards they wanted to know if it was true, and I said to them, no, I lie all the time. Everything I say is a lie. In fact, right now I'm lying to you. That's a paradox. A paradox is when I am weak, then I find I am strong. Now, this was St. Paul who wrote this down for us. What do you know about St. Paul? Those of you who've been around for a while, tell me something about St. Paul. What do you know about him? Persecuted the church. When he first started out, he was an enemy of the Christian church. Yes?
He was transformed. He went from Saul to Paul. That encounter with the Holy Spirit.
Right. He had a profound transformation. On the road to Damascus, right. Pardon? He was Saul originally. Well, in that part of the world, people at that time often had two names anyhow. So sometimes Saul, sometimes Paul. Anybody know anything else about him?
I think he was a Pharisee.
A Pharisee? Yes, he was. He was.
He was a zealot Pharisee.
Very much so, a zealot, and he became a zealot and stayed one all of his life. What else do you know about him? Anybody?
Was he the one that preached to the Corinthians?
Yes. Yes. Right, and this is part of that process, yes. He had a long career, I guess is the word, of traveling around what was then the basis of the Roman Empire, and he built churches. He started churches more than anybody else. He's responsible for the spread of Christianity. He not just started churches, but he also, in those churches, when he would write letters to them, he would try to make some sense out of the teachings of Jesus. Jesus was a storyteller, and storytellers are wonderful. Everybody prefers a story to an essay, but if you've got to think about it and figure out how it works, then you need somebody who can write an essay, an explanation, and that's what Paul was good at. So that's who he was. And he was a driven man. He was driven. Now that's an interesting expression. How many of you drove here today? Okay, but how many of you were driven here today? But not like in Paul's time, because in Paul's time, if you were driven, how were you driven? Oh, no, I mean transportation-wise. Yeah, you were being pulled by a horse, and that horse was being driven with a whip. So when we say somebody was driven, we mean it's as if they were being whipped along. And Paul kind of lived his life that way, as if somebody was behind him whipping him, because he couldn't stop, he couldn't slow down, and he could not lose. He had to win all the time. Do you think, I don't know, do you think his parents pushed him when he was a kid, maybe? Yeah, maybe his parents were like stage parents. You know, they wanted him to be on Broadway, or whatever it was they had back there in Rome, I don't know. Whatever it was, maybe they pushed him, maybe not, because some of you may have a kid who is driven, and you didn't push them, it's just part of the way they were. That was the way it was with St. Paul. So he was driven, and that's why he's traveling all around, building these churches up, starting these churches, and then after he'd get one going, he'd leave someone in charge, but he wouldn't quit. He would write letters to them and encourage them and keep them going and come back around again and visit them again. So sort of a conference minister kind of a person. And he ran into trouble at the church in the city of Corinth. And from that we get the two letters of the Bible known as the Corinthians, the two letters to the church in Corinth. there was a church that was troublesome because the people in there were competitive. They wanted to each be the best Christian in the church. Each person in that church wanted to prove that they were a better Christian than the person next to them. And that's an important thing to do. You know, you need to take a look at the people you're sitting with and determine, are you a better Christian than that person you're sitting with? So they're having a problem in this church. They're difficult to work with. And they're complaining about Paul because some of them think he's not tough enough or strong enough or effective enough as a leader, and they're arguing about that. Some of them like Paul and some of them don't, and they're going to argue about that. Some wanted to get rid of him, some wanted to keep hold of him. Anyhow, they had a problem, and Paul was trying to work with that. And in working with that, he comes across and says this thing. He says, I have a thorn in the flesh. You heard this expression? It says, he doesn't say I have, he says, I have been given a thorn in the flesh. A messenger from Satan has been given to me. And he goes on to say, this messenger is here to beat me, to buffet me. If we were writing it today, we would say, a messenger from Satan who came to smack me around. And he says this was given to him by God. But what was it? What was this thorn in the flesh, this messenger from Satan? A physical infirmity? There are people who think he probably had malaria. Very common in that part of the world, makes you very sick. Has anybody here ever had it? I never have. I hope we've pretty well eliminated that, and it's a good thing. One of the problems with malaria is you can have it and get better and then have it come back around again. And this may have been something that was happening to Paul. He may have been suffering from malaria. Or poor vision. We think he possibly had poor vision as well. Or maybe he had asthma. Or arthritis, something that we treat very easily nowadays, but imagine what that would be like if you lived in that part of the world, you had asthma, and you were traveling around. Could have been pretty tough for him. Something that bothered him, we don't know what it was. Or, another possibility is it could have been a person. Imagine if there was someone, this thorn in the flesh might have been a person, someone who went around wherever Paul went, followed him around, and objected to everything that Paul said, and took back from Paul what he could, and said, Paul doesn't know what he's talking about, come over here and listen to me. And everywhere Paul went, this person went, maybe, and did the same thing. Or maybe it was something in his own mind, something that happened. Maybe he had a doubt that wouldn't go away, or some kind of obsessive thought. Maybe he had a hot temper. There are some of you probably here today who are among that crowd, people who you lose it and you fly off the handle, and it creates a lot of trouble for you. Maybe Paul had a hot temper like that, or something that he dealt with. Maybe depression. Maybe Paul got depressed and somehow had to carry on his work when he felt he had no strength left. Whoever it was, whatever it was, Paul had this thing that he couldn't get past. And it says he prayed 3 times for it to be taken away. And I take that not to mean 3 times he said, God, please take this away from me. I think he spent days in prayer about it, probably fasting, maybe going off into the wilderness by himself, maybe gathering people around to pray with him, to take this thing away from him, and it wouldn't go away. And finally he got the word from Jesus, he says. Jesus spoke to him and said, my grace is what you need. My strength is made perfect in weakness. That was the message he got that he had to learn to live with. My strength is made perfect in weakness. Now, Paul was a tough guy, a powerful person. You know who he was? You know, he was the smartest guy in the room. Everywhere he went, that's who he was. He was the smartest guy in the room wherever he went. He was very strong, very focused. It made him very successful. He was spiritually a very deep person. He could look out at that church in Corinth where what were they arguing about? And he could look at that church and say, well, I know who the best Christian in this room is. It was me. So he was that kind of a guy. He knew that. And he was very, very accomplished and capable, and yet he had this thing, this thorn in the flesh. Whatever it was, this one thing that kept him from being as good as he could be. And you know what it made him? It made him a human being. There's a great story, short little story, I don't know if anybody's seen it, called They're Made of Meat. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? It is a conversation between two aliens on another planet who have just discovered Earth, and the one is trying to explain to the other one, the Earthlings, they're made of meat. The guy goes, what are you talking about? He says, they're meat. He says, well, you mean they're meat on the outside, but there's something inside there that must be working. He goes, no, they're meat all the way through. They just can't believe this concept that they could be, he says, and they live a pretty short life comparatively, because really, how long can meat last, right? Imagine that Paul's thorn was his arrogance. Imagine he was arrogant because he was capable, and imagine the thorn in his flesh was his arrogance, and the fact that he was arrogant separated him from other people and kept him from being good at what he was doing and made him humble. His own arrogance is what made him not arrogant. You understand? It's paradoxical, but maybe that's what it was. Some way, this weakness that he had, he humbled him. He couldn't go into the church in Corinth and say, I'm better than everybody else here. He couldn't do it because he wasn't. He realized he was a human being just like you are, and it humbled him. It also enabled him to be understanding. Are any of you aware of the fact that I can be forgetful? I have a tradition on Sunday morning. I have breakfast with my wife, and I make a cup of coffee and put it in a to-go cup to bring to the office with me while I'm getting ready. I have coffee there. And I generally drink that coffee in the afternoon after I come back home because I leave it on the counter no matter what. Almost always when I get in the car to go home from here or from home to here, I have to pull out of the driveway, turn the car around, go back in again, and get whatever it was I meant to take with me in the first place. If you tell me something this morning, it may not be there this afternoon. You know, I know you know. That's not the worst of it. The worst of it is sometimes you tell me something important, and it matters. And it matters to you, and it matters to me, and yet I forget it. And I hate that. I hate that about myself. And it's been that way for a long time. I'm afraid it is something that I live with. So, if you forget something that I told you, what is my reaction to you? I am very understanding of forgetful people. I am understanding of people who have the weaknesses that I have, because who am I to look down on anybody else? Our weaknesses enable us to be connected because there are just simply things we cannot do by ourselves. You just can't do them by yourself. You can try as hard as you want, but you can't. We are bound together because we are weak and we need each other's help. There are things we just can't do if we don't pitch in together about it. For some of us, that's a hard thing to do. It's hard to be the one in need. We're much better at taking care of others than we are being taken care of, but we have all got that to share. We cannot possibly remain connected if nobody needs anything from anyone else. Our weaknesses enable us to enable others. The fact that you can't do everything by yourself means that you are going to have to get some help with that, and you are going to have to let other people take the lead. One of the important things that happened in the church in Corinth was that Paul realized he could not fix everything in that church. He was going to need help. And he found people in that church who had spiritual gifts and abilities that could be put to work. And if I do everything at this church, what will you do? Well, you'll fix all the things I screw up if I try to do everything, is one of the things. But you have gifts and abilities and strengths that match the weaknesses of others. And if we pretend that we can manage everything, we will be unable to do so. We have to take care and watch out from each other. It lets other people serve when we are weak. And finally, God's power flows through you, and I know this is true. I have confidence in my ability when I get up here at the front of the church. I'm not as nervous as I used to be. I know I can get you to listen to me. I don't feel that confident today because I'm not sure that I was able to get what I wanted to say and what God wanted me to say into the words that I had. If the fact is that your faith is reliant on my ability to put things into words, we are in big trouble. What helps is that your faith can be helped by the fact that I need you like you need me. And that when I am willing to lose, we can all win. If I have to win every time, or if you have to win every time, the only thing that can come from that is we block what God is trying to do. But if we can let each other win from time to time, and that's not easy. I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to conclude today with a story about me and my little brother. Some of you I've already told this to. It was 4:30 the other morning, and I was up. And that's a little early for me, but not a lot early. I was up, and I was sitting outside, and there was a beautiful sunrise going. Gorgeous sunrise. And I just went on Facebook, and I said, anybody else up? Beautiful morning today. And a few people, over the next hour came in, and eventually my brother from Virginia, lives in Hampton, Virginia, my brother signs on, and he says, yes. He says, not only was I up at sunrise, I was up and on my way to work at sunrise. So he just wanted to let me know that he was ahead of me. So I looked it up. 58 minutes. That's the difference in the sunrise between Auburn, Maine, and Hampton, Virginia. Which means that if we were both up at sunrise, I was up nearly an hour ahead of him. So I wrote that back, and I explained that to him, and I said, I was up 58 minutes before you were. I said, I don't know if you knew we were competing, but we were, because we're brothers. He writes back, I'll see your 58 minutes and raise you 20 degrees. Who wins? He won. He won. I could have instead come up with something else and kept that going, and as long as we were just having fun, what harm in that? But it isn't always fun, is it? Sometimes we got to beat other people down. Sometimes we feel like we got to crush somebody down. We have to be ahead of them. We have to beat them. And as long as we do that, the power of God cannot flow through us. What did Jesus do when he was arrested? And someone of his followers pulled out a sword and began to fight with it, and Jesus said, put it away. Put it away. Don't you get it? If I asked for 12 armies of angels to come and defend me, God would send them, but then how would God's will ever be done? It cannot be done if we cannot lose from time to time. And let the power of Christ flow through us. If you have a weakness today, your weakness is where God's strength can take place. Amen.
You've been listening to a sermon by Reverend Stephen Carnahan, pastor of High Street Congregational Church in Auburn, Maine. If you feel inspired by what you hear, we invite you to join us in person for worship services every Sunday morning, beginning at 10 o'clock. Of course, you can always listen to Steve's sermons on the web. New sermons are posted every Monday by midday. Please take a moment to explore this website for more information about our church, or visit our Facebook page at High Street Congregational Church, UCC. We hope that God's presence will be known to you every hour of every day, and that God's blessings will rest upon you now and always. See you next week.